should throw in there also, I started my career in child welfare with DCFS, in the late 80s. So I've had a number of roles in Cook County and then Urbana, and then still supporting the efforts of DCFS and our private agencies through my work at the university. So I'd like to welcome you to this Healing Illinois Town Hall event. And we're going to discuss where we've been, where we are now, and where we are going. The state of child welfare in the Black community. This town hall is sponsored by the Black Administrators in Child Welfare and the Chicago Association of Black Social Workers, in partnership with the DCFS Office of Racial Equity Practice, the Illinois Permanency Enhancement Project, and the School of Social Work at Illinois State University. So as I was preparing for this talk, I was reflecting back on the early days of child welfare practice. In 1964, how many in the room were around in 1964? A few folks, including me. And that's when the Department of Children and Family Services was actually established as the nation's first cabinet-level state child welfare agency. So Illinois was definitely leading the pack. And it was during a time of heightened civil rights awareness, but even during this time there was a controversial Assistant Secretary of Labor, Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Anybody familiar with him? He published a historic report in 1965 entitled The Culture of Poverty, and that was published by the Department of Labor. And in his report, he recommended deep reductions in funding for Black and other marginalized communities, because in the report he noted that such communities were considered hopeless and caught in a tangle of pathology due to maladaptive social behaviors, values, and beliefs. Moynihan denied any existence of any institutional bias and racism as contributing factors to these disparities within our schools, government agencies, child welfare agencies, places of employment, and economic centers. So fast forward to 2009, Dr. Lynn Todman out of Chicago developed a speaker series entitled Community Grand Rounds, Healing the Trauma of Racism. And Todd described the structural disadvantages that communities of color experience. Here, I see a couple folks fanning. I'm kind of, maybe we'll get the air checked. But she talked about those systemic factors that communities of color experience within our institutions. And she operationalized a term called the social exclusion issues, and which is the process by which groups of people are systemically blocked from rights, resources, and opportunities normally available to members of the society in which they reside. Todman explained that some institutional structures may have embedded in them historical attitudes, values, and beliefs about minoritized people that becomes embodied through our laws, policies, and our institutional practices. But in spite of these barriers designed to keep Black communities and families and other communities of color from thriving, Black, BIPOC leaders, everyday citizens, and white allies have continued to break down these barriers through communities of change, through initiatives of change, such as organizations such as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, the National Urban League, 100 Black Men in America, National Council of Negro Women, Black Greek associations. Any Greeks in the house today? We had our event a couple weeks ago in Bloomington, and quite a few members of our Greek organizations. And those organizations really stepped up when some of our formal agencies really were not serving communities of color. And then, of course, today, within this esteemed group is the Black administrators in child welfare, who actually wrote and received funding for this initiative, as well as the Chicago Association of Black Social Workers. So they sought this funding because Illinois has put out an initiative to heal those historic wrongs that have been done and bring our communities together. So that's why we're here today, to have some frank and open discussions about the state of child welfare. And this group is specifically going to focus today on the Springfield and the Springfield and Decatur communities. We had one event that was very successful in Peoria, that focused on Peoria as well as Bloomington. And we'll have another one that will be our third event, and that one will be in Champaign, Illinois, focusing on the Champaign and Danville communities. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce you to the president of the Black Administrators in Child Welfare, Ms. Jackie Gray. We have this wireless mic. Oh, okay.
Good morning. Good morning. Can you all hear me? On behalf of the Black Administrators in Child Welfare of Illinois, I would like to really welcome all of you to a series of town meetings. And this is, as Dr. Houston stated, this is the second of 3 town hall meetings that we will convene throughout Central Illinois. I want to tell you a little bit about Black Administrators in Child Welfare. We were established in 2014, and with a primary mission of committing ourselves to local communities throughout the state to help develop programs that will reduce disproportionality within the various systems, within government, as well as within the private sector, as well as addressing desperate treatment, which we know is a critical issue as we try to service our families that are in need of interventions in order to keep our children out of care. Another priority that we really focus on is leadership. We have developed, and we're very proud of this, we have developed a Child Welfare Leadership Institute within the state of Illinois. The institute is primarily to enrich and develop African American leaders that are current leaders or those that are emerging to become leaders. And this year, our institute is being held in Central Illinois and Bloomington in June. So those are some of the 2 major things that we are really focused on within our organization. And as Dr. Houston stated, we were very proud in partnership with the Chicago Association of Black Social Workers to submit for a grant through Healing Illinois, which is a major initiative throughout the state of Illinois with the Department of Human Services. And Dr. Johnson will tell you more about that. She's the president of Chicago Association of Black Social Workers. So today really is an opportunity for each and every one of you to engage in very important dialogue as it relates to racial healing. That will identify inequities in Central Illinois, as well as building connections. Connections are so important across various systems. And I'm hoping today we have a diverse group of representatives from the public and private sector. Again, I want to welcome you. Please share your thoughts as we break out into groups and really have additional dialogue. And together, I strongly believe that we can advocate for racial equity throughout the state of Illinois within our various child welfare systems. So enjoy today's event. And with this, I would like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Tiffany Johnson. Is she here? Oh.
child welfare system are deeply concerning, and it is our collective responsibility to advocate for change and ensure that every child has access to a safe, nurturing, and supportive environment. Throughout this town hall meeting, we will have the opportunity to hear from experts, community members, and stakeholders who are dedicated to advancing racial equity and child welfare. I encourage each of you to actively participate, ask questions, and share your insights as we strive to create a more inclusive and equitable child welfare system. Together, we can make a difference and create positive change for the Black community in Central Illinois. Thank you for being here and for your commitment to this important cause. Let us begin this important conversation with open hearts and minds. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tiffany. And just want to draw to your attention, those of you who are with agencies that serve children and families, that there are organizations such as the Black Administrators in Child Welfare, as well as the Chicago Association of Black Social Workers, and a number of other organizations, the NAACP, other groups that, when you're working with families of color, these are important members to bring to the table with you, because they have deep, deep, deep ties in the community. They are trusted partners. So something to think about. We usually think about when we're providing services or developing plans that we focus on the formalized agencies, but there's so many other resources, so I want to invite you to consider them and make sure you partner with them. Another important partner to this initiative is the Office of Racial Equity Practice within the Department of Children and Family Services. So now I'd like to welcome Ms. Dejanay Brown, who is the Director of the DCFS Office of Racial Equity Practice, and actually her office supports and funds the Illinois Permanency Enhancement Initiative.
Well, thank you, Good morning. Good morning. All right, because everybody was sounding a little dry. We had some good, interesting, important work today, and I need people to seem like they're glad to be here. Good morning. Good morning. Oh, that sounds so much better. So in light of the time, I'm not going to hold us, because I know we have an important agenda to get through today, but I welcome, as they have welcomed you already before, welcome again. I'm Dejanay Brown. I direct the Office of Racial Equity Practice at DCFS, where we do a number of different things to address racial disproportionality for our Black youth in care. Today, we want to hear from you. We want to learn from you. We want to learn from the community. We want to know how community, our private partners, DCFS, how do we partner together to do something great to help our Black kids that are being impacted in the system? We're looking for some racial healing. This is a healing centered, focused event today. So we want to stay in the spirit of being healed. And how do we heal? How do we do the work to heal folks that are being impacted by the system? And how do we continue to work together to do that? We have to do that. We can't do it in silos. This can't happen independent of one another. We have to work together to do that. We need everybody here that's in this room, folks that you know that are not in the room. We need you to tell them about the work and how they can be a part of the work, because the work that we're doing is very important. So thank you for being here, and again, welcome.
Thank you, Dejanay. Just wanted to also acknowledge that after this event, and we're really calling this or considering this a reboot, we had the Illinois Permanency Enhancement Initiative that was established in 2008. And the goal of that group is to do what we're doing today, break down some of the issues, concerns, as well as achievements and accomplishments, but at a county level. And so this initiative, again, started in 2008, and but as you can imagine, due to various folks leaving, budget cuts, etc., that there's been ups and downs, but we are still here, and again, thrilled to have you. I do want to acknowledge that there are action teams, which are those local teams that will be doing the work ongoing. And we have 3 members of our action teams that will be hosting follow-up meetings for this dialogue. And so that's Rachel Wilson, LaShonda Rogers, and Geneva Bird. You'll hear more about those follow-up meetings as we move along, but we did want to acknowledge them. There's also a steering committee that we'd like to acknowledge. So a lot of folks came together in a relatively short amount of time to bring us all together here. Again, just statewide as well as central region, as well as even national partners with Casey Foundation. So as I mentioned, the Illinois Permanency Enhancement Project has 4 primary objectives. One is community-based solutions to improve family permanency and child well-being. The second being reducing racial disparities among children of color who are receiving child welfare and child protection services. And then the next, using data to drive our decisions. Where does the work need to be done? Where have we had good accomplishments? And then having these stakeholder partnerships. So again, that's where you come in, and that'll be the focus of our dialogue. Did want to bring Mr. Michael Burns up. Michael was one of our advocates that really started this initiative through the African American Advisory Council many, many moons ago. Michael worked for the department, 40? How many years? 43 years. Give him a hand for that. Continues to be a strong advocate, and if there's anyone that knows community engagement and advocacy, it's Michael. So we wanted him to share with you just where we have been with this initiative and the state of child welfare, with some examples of what can be accomplished through your efforts.
Thank you, Doris. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Kind of getting over the cold, so I'm struggling with it. So, I'm just going to try to do some examples of some of the things that were done during the early stages. Can you hear me?
Is it on? The first light on?
Here we go.
Okay, we'll call the IT. I told him, I said, our IT person, please stay around. So I'll give him a call. So you may have to really speak loudly.
So I'm just trying to give a few examples of some of the things that were done in the early beginnings of the Permanency Enhancement Project. Like I used to say, it began in 2008. The plan began in 2006, and the first county region, where the central region was central region, it was symposium in 2007. And it went from that region to southern, northern. So some of the things that most of the teams did across the state initially was to really try to educate the communities on the child welfare system and an important role that communities play in these systems. So one way of doing that was a groundswell of mandated appointed trainings at the community level. And I can call, even though they say we can't claim things happen because of what we did, but I remember in Decatur County, they really comprehensively went through that community. And within, I think, a year, we saw their kids coming here to the dudes, and I can't remember exactly. I'm going to power 100%. Mic check 1, 2. Okay. So did you hear anything I said?
Every other word.
Okay. So from there, you know, we convened action teams, but the department already had the local area networks, family advocacy centers, fatherhood initiatives. There were some others I can't recall right now, but each action team would have the DCFS chairperson and a community chairperson. And at that time, we had the local area network, so the land liaison served as the DCFS chairperson, which made it very easy to transform into this project. Because the land at that time, under Director Brian Sanders, had changed its focus to education initiative. So we already had a relationship with one state board of education. And having that type of support already made it easier for us to do the education collaboration. However, there are ups and downs when you're doing work with basically depending on volunteers. So we wanted to bring all of the institutions together that connected to the child welfare system and make reports to the DCFS hotline. So we know that schools and law enforcement are the highest reporters to the hotline. So we wanted to get those people to the table so we can look at strategies to reduce that. We see that only about 20% of the reports from the schools are found. So there's a big gap between indication and those families that were not indicated. So do they need services? Should they have been referred in the first place or not? So as the action team, we look at stuff like that. We get the data from Illinois State, who gets the data from Chapin Hall, and we try to make the data drive our focus. I'll give you some examples of some of the things that took place. I started in the southern region, go north. In the southern region, some of the things they did in addition was they established a relationship with the Department of Human Services so that when reunification takes place, they could make sure that parents' funding is restored in a timely manner. Also, one of the main things I like about the Southern region, they met quarterly at the court, the judges, state's attorneys, clergy witnesses. And at that meeting, you would have both DCFS and private agency supervisors. They would identify issues that need to be resolved. An example, we found that in many cases, there was violation of the Indian Child Welfare Act. And that was because oftentimes the family was not known to be part of the Child Welfare Act. So they came up with a plan to emphasize finding out if a family was involved in Child Welfare Act early on in the process, so it would delay the court process, which delays permanency. So in addition to meeting monthly, they had that be reported. In the central region, the action team, in partnership with the Family Advocacy Center, created a curriculum to train parents, and it's called Getting Our Families Back Together. That curriculum was created around 2008. It still exists in the Family Advocacy Center. They even tried to serve families during COVID virtually. You know, that was very difficult. They did have some success. I'll give an example. I already gave an example. northern region. Cook County, there's a booklet being passed around. Cook County named their teams, so they have one team called Progressive Partners, another team called I can't think of it right. Progressive Partners were instrumental in launching, advocating for picket care. So we know that that is a very important piece of legislation that we have now that gives another option for placement for a child and maintain some stability. The booklet that I passed around, the team felt like that cases coming to the DCFS, it seems like the parents are the last one to receive significant input how to navigate through the system. So they developed a book that shows how to navigate through the system, through the courts, and I'm just passing that around. If you get that book now, it's in stores. I have shared it in regions across the state back when I was here. But you can still get access to it. It's very helpful to parents because a lot of times they don't know their rights. They feel overwhelmed trying to navigate through this system. Dr. Houston had put up a handout showing some collaborative partners. So you see we have parents, courts, community, and university partners. University partners have played a very vital role. Each week has a university partner. And if they had stayed with this program, I don't think it would be existing. I mean, this is our 18th year. I think we deserve a hand for that. So I think that's about it for me.
Michael, thank you. And as you can tell, he is a wealth of information with 43 years dedicated to serving children and families. And again, the thing we're most proud of is all of these initiatives and many more. These are just examples with a broad stroke. All of these were initiated at the local level. So determining what the issues are and then concerned citizens, workers, other professionals, business leaders, school leaders, court personnel coming together and saying, hey, let's make our focus be on X, Y, and Z. So that's why we're here. And we now have the pleasure of introduce and bringing to the stage Mr. Lyman Lecters, who is here to join us from California. He is the Senior Director of Strategic Consulting with Casey Family Programs. You can read about him and his bio in your folders. And so he's going to share with us some of his thoughts, his vision, and again, we want to thank you for serving so many states and agencies to do this important work. So come on up and let's welcome Lyman.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Wonderful to see you all. Yes, I am from California, so if I say anything that annoys you today, I will be getting on a plane going home. So you just have to sit with that. Dr. Doris, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you. It's a privilege. I work for Casey Family Programs, which is a national foundation. It's the largest operating foundation in the nation, solely focused on improving outcomes for children and families that experience our child welfare and child protection systems. I, along with my colleague Simone Wild, who's seated towards the back, who's our policy director, have the privilege of working with the great state of Illinois. So yes, I live in California, but I spend a lot of time in Illinois. so I'm excited to be here this morning. This conversation is really important. We've been talking about racial justice, racial equity for a very long time. I see some colleagues who I've known for decades. We've been working on this issue, right? And we talk about addressing, and we talk about programs and training, and we talk about all these things, which are all good. We need to improve what we have. But what if the system is doing exactly what it's designed to do? What if it's not by accident? What if we're not fixing something that's broken? We're actually tinkering with something that's designed in a particular way. And so there's some questions that I'll pose to you, and this is really an invitation, because we've talked about where we're coming, easy for me to say. We've talked about where we've come from, we've talked about the situation. Now, I'm going to invite you to think about something in the future that doesn't exist. I believe a number of things. One, I believe that racial justice is the issue of our era, and we must solve it. Not just address it, we must solve it. It won't happen unless we're serious about transformation, creating something completely different. And we can't be serious about transformation without being serious about justice, anti-oppression, anti-racism work. So that's kind of the frame that I come at this from. I think that it's important that it's not a binary discussion. We absolutely have to continue to improve the practice that we have. It's not going away tomorrow, right? We need to continue to focus on improvement. It's not an indictment on people who work in the system. I've worked in the system for over 40 years in juvenile justice and child welfare, so this is not an indictment on individuals. But it really is an invitation to think differently about what we're trying to create down the road, what we're trying to transform to. So the talk this morning is really about considering, make sure I can do this right, considering well-becoming as a frame, and I'm going to define that a little bit for you, but really shifting our focus away from the circumstances that we tend to focus on when children and families come to our attention. We're really thinking long-term about what we're investing in terms of the babies that we're serving, the families we're serving, and the communities that we're serving. And I meant to say, too, this is beautiful, this being in the community, because it doesn't matter what I say or what the foundation talks about, or even what's talked about headquarters at DCFS, if it doesn't impact the neighborhood. If it doesn't get to the neighborhood, it doesn't matter. So I'm really excited to be here and be part of this conversation with you all today. So, a transformational frame. Our president and CEO, Dr. William Bell, was the commissioner in New York for a number of years before he came to the foundation, frequently asked the question when he begins our meetings at the foundation, with how are the children? He asked that question, how are the children? Now, many of us have heard that over and over again. It comes from an African village, the original saying. And I want to invite you to consider that this is not passe, this is not rhetorical. This is a serious question. And what we need to do is be thinking about how we can create a system, change structures, change our operations so that we can ultimately answer the question that the children are well. So we all have children in our lives, whether they're our birth children or natural children. My son happens to be adopted. I married his mom, and so got him in the package deal, right? Been raising him since he was 3. But we all have children in our lives, whether they're our natural children, nieces, nephews, neighbors, whatever. And I think we need to ask the question about what we hope for our children. What we really hope and believe for our children, what we want for our children. And I think about it in the context of the work that we do. And when I think about the children in my life, I don't think about, kind of selecting pieces of them to focus on, right? I don't think about, well, do I want them to have housing, or do I want them to have food? Do I want them to have education? Do I want them to be financially stable? We don't go about picking those things, right? Selecting them for our children. We pick it all, right? Do you agree? For the children, we pick it all. We choose it all. But in the work that we do, we focus on circumstances. We pick things. We pick safety, permanency. Maybe if we get some time, some extra money. We'll talk a little bit about well-being. But we focus on circumstances. I'm really pushing a conversation around transforming to a different context, transforming to a different lens. So we really want to think about our own children and make sure that what we do in our work is not distinctly different for other people's children. So what do we choose for the children? Let's see, I put the question up after I answered it already, sorry. We choose it all, right? We choose it all. And so I think we also need to have that same frame for what we wish for other people's children. Is it different? When we're serving a child in the community, do we see that child differently from our own children, from the children in our lives? And that's a question. I mean, we need to keep that in the back of our mind. So I invite you to think about that, to keep that top of mind as I go through my talk this morning. There's some prevailing narratives. We've heard some of them already. Our system is designed a certain way. It's based on, and Dr. Doris mentioned some historical context. It's really important for us to understand history. And sorry for this little kind of aside, but our society right now is struggling with history. We're struggling with history, and we have to hold the line on that. So we're going to have to really be intentional about leaning into history and understanding where we come from. So that the Moynihan Report was incredibly important to understand because that drove policy for years. And we need to be thoughtful about that. But our system, child welfare in particular, is founded on a rescue movement. Save these poor babies from these bad families. You know, we're going to punish the families along the way, right? So we need to understand that. We need to understand where we're coming from. And that's how the system essentially has been designed. So the tools were offered to help children be safe, to help them achieve permanency, largely induce trauma. When all we have to keep a child safe is to remove them from their family. And I'm not saying that that's not what you're supposed to do. I get it. You've got to make sure safety's paramount. I'm not arguing against that. But when we have a system that the main tool, the primary tool we have to keep a child safe is to remove them from their family, we need to think about that. Because that can induce trauma that's far greater than anything they're experiencing in their families. Anything that is presenting to them, is presenting them to us. There's a law and order narrative out there when it comes to our criminal justice systems, policing, communities, and this is often conflated with justice. Justice and law and order are not the same thing. So I'm sorry for all you law and order fans who like to watch it on TV. It's been running for like 30 years. But we need to get clear that justice needs to be differently defined than law and order. And so that's another invitation to consider the language that we use. The science continues to grow. The data analysis is prevalent in all of these systems, but it's still fragmented. The science still dissects children and families based on the circumstance that they're studying. We dissect children based on safety from abuse and neglect. We dissect children from criminogenic risk factors and behaviors that bring them into the criminal justice system. We dissect them by education issues. We're not looking at families, the science is not looking at families holistically, and so we need to invite them into the conversation too and make sure that we're not fragmented in our approaches to understanding the complexity of children and families and how we can better serve them. We love to tinker with our systems. We got a new project, new program, new training model, and again, it's not binary. We need to continue to improve our systems, improve the work that we do, and we need to think about something different. We need to think about something beyond simply tinkering around the edges of the system and the work that we do. We identify children and families from this victim villain mentality. We identify them based on the worst thing that ever happened to them or the worst thing they ever did. And we need to stop that. We need to be careful about that, creating identities for children and families that are circumstantial and that does not clearly define, clearly offer a holistic identity, a holistic perspective of the children and families that we're interested in serving. So, our current systems react. Child protection does not get involved in the child or family's situation or some incident that has happened. So we call it child protection, but in reality, it's a system that reacts and is not moving upstream, not preventing the initial instances of abuse and neglect. All of our systems are like that. Our criminal justice systems are the same way. And typically our other systems, education, mental health, behavioral health, again, are not moving upstream. They're reacting when situations arise and we're needing to deal with the behavior or deal with some kind of complexity in the child and family's life. We focus ourselves on investigations and findings. So we're looking for something. We're looking for something to pull out of that family that can, either, typically we say we want to get them services, but getting services means some other stuff too, to bring them into the system. There's a whole nother level of burden on that family, on that child. So again, it's focused on investigations and findings. We are deficit oriented. We're looking for the problems, we're looking for the deficits in the family and the child to focus on, and that's where we pay our attention. That's where we pay most of our attention. We are trauma inducing, I already mentioned that. All of our systems, removing a child from their family is trauma inducing, putting a child in detention is trauma inducing, expelling a child from school is trauma inducing. I've never understood why we suspend children for truancy. What's up with that? They're truants. Also, we'll kick them out of school. Sorry, I have a grandson that we're dealing with some stuff as well. I'm going to introduce you to him in a few minutes, but this is like, some of that stuff just doesn't make sense. Our systems, all of our systems, have issues with injustice. Racialized injustice, gender injustice, sexual orientation injustice, immigration status injustice, all of those things where we marginalize and other whole populations because of the systemic issues that we have, the systemic racism, the systemic oppression. And our systems are disconnected. We have, and in Illinois it's pretty vivid, you have a sister agency at the cabinet level for each system. You have DCFS, you have DJJ, you have DHS, you have ISB, you have all of these systems that are separate structures. Children and families do not recognize the silos that we've created. They only recognize that they have somebody new in their lives telling them what to do, and giving them a list of things that they have to do in order to not be bothered anymore by the system, right? So one of the things that we need to think about is what brings systems together. Can we stop looking at children and families based on the circumstance that presents them to us and the system that we have to work in? And that doesn't mean that as a child welfare or social worker, I have to be responsible for educational outcomes. I can't be responsible for teaching that child or making sure that child is engaged in school, but I can make sure that the school is paying attention to that, and I need to be responsible for the outcome, whether it's the work that I'm doing or not. So that's one of the things that we need to consider in our efforts. The silo structures are impediments to better outcomes for our children and families. And we're all serving the same children and families. My experience before coming to KC Family Programs was in the youth justice system, in juvenile justice in Seattle, Washington. I ran the probation department for a number of years before coming to KC. And I can tell you vividly, my experience, I was definitely part of the problem. Because if it wasn't for those child welfare social workers not doing their job, I wouldn't have these kids coming into detention or coming into probation. That was my orientation until I came to child welfare. And I realized, wait a minute, we all have the same goals, we all have the same motivations, we all have the same why of being in this work together. So it's important for us to think differently about the way the systems are structured and how that's an impediment to better outcomes for children and families. So what if we shifted our focus, changed our lens a little bit, and thought differently about what we're trying to accomplish? Well-being has historically been kind of the third leg of child welfare, right? I said it earlier. Safety, permanency, and if we have some extra time or extra money, we'll put something into well-being. I want to suggest to you that well-being should be our umbrella frame. Well-being should be the overarching frame by which we all operate, that our focus should be on this notion of well-being, and I'll explain why. First, a definition for you to consider. Well-being is a satisfactory human condition characterized by health, happiness, and fulfillment. Well-being is not a state of being that one achieves and then lives in for a lifetime. My knees will confirm that statement. We do not become well and stay there forever. It's not a circumstance. Defining for oneself, the individual defining for oneself, moving forward, and achieving well-being is a continual developmental process beginning at infancy and continuing throughout the course of life. Indeed, a better term for that process may be well-becoming. So, seeing it as a continual process of life, continuing to become well. But why would we consider that as a frame for the systems that we're involved in? Well, first of all, and this is a phrase that I say it's mine now, but I got it from somebody else. You know, you give credit 3 times and it becomes your own, right? But a colleague of mine, we were developing some frameworks on well-being, suggested that well-being can be a coagulating agent. We can show across systems how everybody is contributing to or not this notion of well-being. We can define it from a child welfare perspective. We can define well-being, and it's beyond education, employment, and mental health. Those are the kind of 3 components of well-being in the child welfare context. It's much broader than that. There are multiple domains, and it is a life course perspective. But well-being is a coagulating agent. It can bring us together. We can speak the same language. I've had an opportunity to work at the Department of Justice for a few years. And one of the things that I learned was that each system has its own language. And I knew that before, but at the federal level, it was really compelling because we would come together in these cross-agency conversations and really talk about better outcomes for children and families, how we could work together. But we could not get past the language. Juvenile justice had its own set of languages and acronyms, its own funding streams, its own legislative mandates, child welfare the same way, mental health, behavioral health the same way. So what we learned was that we needed something that brought the systems together, and we believe that well-being does that. Well-being travels from system to system. And in a well-being framework that I believe is going to be shared afterwards, right? We're going to send it out to participants. The well-being framework that was developed by the Youth Transition Funders Group does that for us. It talks about well-being from each systemic context and how those systems are contributing to the well-being of children and families. We've already shown that narrow and uncoordinated approaches don't work. The silo structures do not work for the children and families we're trying to serve. We need to shift from transactional to transformational change. And so ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, the answer to the question, how are the children, will be that our children are well. So transformation is necessary in that space. Well-being offers us a life course perspective. So while we're focused on circumstances, safety is paramount. For child welfare, safety is paramount. We've got to make sure that children are safe. But it doesn't stop there. We have to think about how our decisions, our investments, our work with children and families play out next week, 5 years from now, 10, 15 years from now. We need to have this life course perspective, and investing in well-being does that for us. Well-being aligns with current science. Much of the science around developmental assets and all of the ACEs research, all of those, the kind of research around developmental issues for children and families went into the development of this framework. So I just encourage you to take a peek at that, because the notion of well-being, creating a well-being system, actually aligns with what the science says. And ultimately, it sets healing and wholeness as the goal, which is, again, the beauty of this convening, where we're talking about healing communities, we're talking about healing Illinois, and that's the fundamental focus of well-being, is making sure that our children and families have the opportunity to heal from the experiences that they have. So well-being does that for us. It sets healing and wellness as the goal. Oh, one more. And as important as anything else, well-being centers racialized injustice, centers healing from racialized injustice, and builds us towards equity. So the well-being framework that will be shared with you later actually is the only place that I've seen racial justice defined as a well-being domain. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist somewhere else, but it's the only place I've seen it. And so I encourage you again to look at that, that if we think about impacting racism, impacting other oppressions in our systems, well-being gives us that frame to do that. The healing aspect of it, we need to be responsible for the healing from the racialized trauma, from the marginalized trauma that children and families experience in our systems. This is my grandson. This is the first time I met him. His name is AJ. When he was born, he had some eating issues and some developmental issues, so he spent 6 weeks in NICU. And I share this story, I love to show off my grandson, but I share this story because of the experience that I witnessed while during that 6 weeks that he was in the neonatal intensive care unit. AJ, what I got to watch was multiple individuals, all with distinct roles, right? It was all in the medical field, I get that, but very distinct disciplines. Radiologists, nutritionists, multiple nurses, doctors, x-ray techs, those are radiologists. All of these folks with these different disciplines working with AJ for 6 weeks with one goal in mind. One goal in mind, all of them centered on helping AJ become well. And after he came out of NICU, this is what he looked like now. He doesn't look this cute anymore. But he looks this cute now. I mean, he's now a very precocious 9-year-old boy, young man, who is well. He's healthy, he's well, and all of that we can trace back to the investment of well becoming by that neonatal intensive care unit, all with different disciplines. So I believe that social workers and probation officers and education folks, educators and mental health professionals can come together and work collectively to help our children, families, and communities become well. So we have had conversations nationally about the fact, first of all, that this is another important component of history, is that our system is built largely on 19th and 20th century principles. It's 2024, we're almost a quarter of the way through the 21st century. We haven't shifted that focus away from those principles that are a couple of hundred years old now. So what would it look like if we were to actually create a 21st century well-being system? And I'd expand that, it's a 21st century child, family, and community well-being system. What would that look like? It would be proactive. We would not be waiting to invest in families until that trauma happens, until that incident happens. We would be focused on protecting families and communities, and we would be investing in that. We would be focused on primary prevention, making sure that harm is not caused to our children in all different facets. So safety would have a broader context too. It's absolutely safety from abuse and neglect within the family, but it's also safety from community violence, it's safety from other traumatic factors that exist in our communities. So making sure that we're moving upstream. And I will say too that there's some wonderful conversations happening right here in Illinois about this notion of primary prevention and how we can move in that direction through some of the investments that are being made. Strengths-based, holistic, we're not dissecting the children based on certain circumstances, we're seeing them as whole beings, whole people that we can all contribute to the healthy development of. Life course perspective, where we're not, again, dealing with the circumstance, solving that circumstance, and then just letting the child and family go off and do their thing. We're really focused on investing for long-term success for those children and families. Absolutely incorporates a commitment to racial justice and other injustices in our systems. And I will say that for racial justice and other justice issues, it has to be centered as intentional. So having an Office of Racial Justice, Racial Equity Practice at DCFS is important, centering it as its own priority, but also making sure that there is a thread and a through line across all the work that we do. So all of the domains in the well-being framework have a focus on racial justice. So then the question becomes, are we serious about transformation, or do we want to just continue tinkering? Can we do both? So this is a little bit of a funny cartoon that says, I want you to find a bold and innovative way to do everything exactly the same way it's been done for 25 years. Anybody been involved in that great initiative, that great project, that great program that was going to change everybody's lives? That panacea that is going to be the next great thing? We need to think differently about that. Because as long as we continue to focus on the system that we have, without a notion of transforming to something better, creating something different, we're going to continue in the cycle of tinkering with the system. And again, it's both and. We have to do both. We have to do better with what we have. We got to create something new. So I wanted to offer to this definition of transformation, because we all use that word, right? We use that word. We use transformation to describe things. One of the biggest one that's been used recently is the Families First and Prevention Services Act. It's been introduced as this transformational initiative. It doesn't really offer transformation. It fixes a funding problem. It opens up the entitlement, the 4E entitlement, to fund things that we should have been funding all along. We should have been investing in families, investing in parents all along. So it's not, in essence, transformational. It's a good thing. I'm not disparaging it at all. It was great. It's one of the most profound pieces of legislation in child welfare in recent history. But it's not transformation. It's simply allowing us to do better within the construct that we have. So transformation in an organizational context is a process of profound and radical change that orients an organization in a new direction and takes it to an entirely different level of effectiveness. Unlike turnaround, which implies incremental progress on the same plane, transformation implies a basic change of character and little or no resemblance with the past configuration or structure. So can we envision a system that doesn't look anything like what we have right now? It's a fundamental change of character. It looks completely different. I think that that's something that we can strive towards. So I'm out here talking about it. I think that there's a lot of it. It's going to take a lot of energy to make that happen. There's no formula. There's not a kind of linear formula. But I will say that the answers are right here in the room. If we're serious about leaning into the space of transformation, we can figure it out. So there's some new learning for me around this notion of transformation and what it will take. Are we doing okay on time? You want to hurry up? Well, I do my thing, but hurry up.
Do your thing fast.
Well, I do want to offer a moment for some questions, and I'll be around for most of the morning if you want to catch me on the side. But there's some new learning that comes out of some work by Dr. Sean Jenwright. Dr. Jenwright has been one of the people that I've followed for the better part of a decade around. He writes a lot about radical healing from racialized trauma. And he's written a new book called The Four Pivots, and where it really talks about this notion of transformation and what it takes to get to a fundamental change of structure, of thinking, of priority. And so he offers us some myths to consider. We believe that we can get deep change by implementing surface level solutions. So that was back to my earlier statement about that project, that training, that panacea that we brought in that was going to change our lives. It was really on the surface level and didn't get to the root causes of what we're trying to change. He suggests that there's this belief that the more power we have, the more change we can create. Now that's from an internal perspective and a systemic perspective. I do think that the more power that exists in the community, the more change we can make. But as individuals, we need to think about that. And having another level of position in the system or position in the community doesn't necessarily get us that kind of change. That we can strategize for social change, creating strategies without this notion of transformation does not get us to the kind of social change we're trying to create. So strategies need to align with this vision of something completely different. So if we're strategizing within the current context, again, we're putting all of our focus on tinkering with the system as it is. And us versus them. This is one that I really have heart for, because I see across the country in my own experience in local work and working with systems across the country, how divided we are, despite the fact that we're all here with the priority of serving children and families, how poorly we treat each other. Anybody had an argument with one of your coworkers, or somebody from the other unit, or somebody from the provider community, or, I mean, we bring so much attention into our own work. The us versus them mentality is not effective. We have to figure out how to align with each other, align across systems, and that's going to take some work. That's going to take some vulnerability, some trust building, and some real intention to make that happen. So for today, my invitation to you is to think about that. Think about that us versus them mentality. How are you experiencing that? How are you contributing to that? And is that something you can flip and start working on? So in order to move through these myths, he's offering some ideas around how we need to shift our thinking, shift our focus. So that us versus them mentality is one that can be resolved if we spend a little bit more time in the mirror. Our lenses shade how we interact with people. If we're looking through a particular lens, we see things. This is another thing about implicit bias, that we are looking through particular lenses. Are we externalizing the problems? So that shifts our gaze out the window, right? So we're looking out the window at all the problems that somebody else caused. If we spend a little bit more time in the mirror and ask ourselves the question, am I doing all I can? Why did I react that way? What do I think about this? What is my purpose? What is my why? What am I willing to do? That gets us, that's one of the pivots that we need to make. Away from the lens and to the mirror. Transactional to transformation, we've talked about that a lot, but we really need to be intentional about transformational change. And so that is something that we just have to go deeper on and get a better understanding of. Shifting from problems to possibilities. This is the idea of creating a 21st century child and family well-being system. Our systems are so focused on problems that we're trying to fix in the moment, circumstances we're trying to resolve in the moment, that we don't give ourselves time to think about possibilities. What are the possibilities of a healing-centered approach? What are the possibilities of an umbrella frame of well-being where we're all contributing to the health and wholeness and well-being of children, families, and communities here in Illinois? So shifting our focus from problems to possibilities. And lastly, this is one of my favorite ones too. Dr. Jenwright says that we're addicted to frenzy. Anybody feel that sometimes in our day-to-day? We got how many emails are waiting for you when you go back to the office tomorrow? How many meetings do you have tomorrow? What are you having to catch up on because you're spending the day with us today? But this notion of frenzy and how busy becomes our orientation, whether we're actually having an impact or not, busyness is how we define our effectiveness. So he suggests that we need to shift a little bit from hustle to flow. And part of that is taking care of ourselves, making sure that we're doing some wellness work on ourselves. And you're going to experience a little bit of that later today with our colleague Sam as he helps us think through some of this wellness stuff. We're actually doing some of that work at the foundation with a select group of leaders from across the country who are involved in the racial justice space, and inviting them to come into a place where they're centering their own wellness, making sure they're doing simple things, breathing right, drinking lots of water, having cathartic space to exchange with each other. So shifting from hustle to flow and making sure that we're centered in that healthy space of flow. So that is my time. I thank you for your attention. Again, thank you for the invitation to be here. I just love these conversations. Am I okay for a couple of questions, Dr. Doris? So I just need to make sure I get permission, right? So, again, I would love to hear if you have questions. I'll be around the rest of the morning. So, anybody have a question or comment on anything I shared? I see people out there, I know you're not shy. So,
And if not, we're about to move into some discussions, some group discussions.
that's fine. All right. Well, listen, I thank you so much. Thank you not only for listening, but thank you for
Thank you, Lyman. And, you know, two things that stuck out to me are moving from problems to possibilities. And that's why we're here today, to give ourselves permission to envision. How many of you got into this work because we wanted to support families' healing? Absolutely. And sometimes along the way, we get stuck on that track where we're doing the checklists and the service plans and the reports, and along the way, giving ourselves that permission to refocus us on why we're doing this work. So we want to shift our focus now. We're going to have some opportunities for you to get up, move around, meet some people, and Mr. Sam Smith is going to lead us through a couple of exercises. So we did shift the program around because we thought you might by now want to have that chance to get up, move around, etc. So I'm going to turn it over to Sam, and he's going to lead us through some time to get to know each other and also have some ideas that we'll share with each other. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. D, and thank you, Lyman, again. My name is Sam Smith, and I don't need the mic, do I? No, I don't need the mic. How much time do I have, timekeeper?
We're going to turn it over to Dr. Amon.
Give you a moment?
Yes.
All right. 10:22.
Let's get started. We'll let you go.
Okay, all right. Don't be yelling at me tonight about how much time you got. Y'all heard me ask you how much time I got, right? Okay, all right. I'm going to tell you the truth right now. That's going to be the last time I do that, but I'm going to tell you the truth right now. When I was a undergrad psych major, one of my favorite professors was a guy named Lot Van Adden. And he was a physiologist, and he was studying the physiological mechanisms of pain, and I was very interested in that. And Locke told me, he said, Sam, the brain is an amazing thing. It actually starts working even before you're born, and it doesn't stop until you stand up and speak in public. So I say all of that to say, I don't know how much time I got. I'm not quite sure what we're going to do. I have framed some of this work for you, and I'm not quite sure how well I will be able to stick to that. But can we see the next slide? I think there are going to be some questions on this slide that I'm going to want you to spend some time doing. But again, I'm going to dance around. So you've got a little, you have something to write on. All right, I'll tell you what the questions are. This is really, I think, not my question, but I think it is really a fundamental question. I'm only going to give you 1 minute to do this. It's like a timed exam. I don't know if any of you members of the room was in college. I don't quite know how to ask this question. I think that the reason that we are here is because of these sort of continuing racial disparities in child welfare. Is that why you're here? Right? Continuing racial disparities in child welfare. So I want to give you just 1 minute. And someone set a timer, like just 60 seconds. And here's a question I want you to answer, just for yourself, right? What is that? When we talk about a racial disparity in child welfare, what are we talking about? You might answer that question by saying, what does that mean? How do you know it exists? What is a racial disparity in child welfare? Where does it come from? What are its sources? What are its roots? What is a racial disparity in child welfare? There are like 40 of us in this room focused on racial disparity in child welfare. What is that? 59, 58, 57, 56, 55. She needs a piece of paper and pen. Yes, ma'am. What is a racial disparity in child welfare? What is it? What is it? What is it? 39, 38. What is a racial disparity in child welfare? What are we talking about? You might know something that I don't know. Someone sitting next to you might have a perspective that you may not have, so let's find out what those are. And what I realized this morning is all I have are questions. And that's one of them. And that one kind of came up for me last night. Okay, let's try. Let's just get some answers to that. All right? We'll do it like this.
Really?
Yes, ma'am. What is the answer the question and throw the ball?
I'm saying education.
Okay, throw the ball, pass it to somebody else. Okay, we don't have a Major League Baseball team here. Okay, what is it?
Okay. I feel like one of the racial disparities is between like the caseworkers. So if you have a family that's Caucasian, or kind of like So basically, you want to make sure the caseworker that serves the family has like a connection with the family, because I'll see that a lot. Like it'll either foster parents or they don't know. It's like you got to disconnect. Yeah. So ethnicity, making sure like it's connected.
So what you're saying is that if you have black caseworkers with black families, that's less racial disparity. If you have black families, white caseworkers, that's more racial disparities. So racial, ethnic, cultural alignment is an indication of racial disparity. Okay, pass it to someone else. What is it?
Where's my mind?
What racial disparities? What is it?
I would say the court system.
Okay, you would say the court system.
Yeah, how African American families are treated.
Can we use the microphone? We can't hear responses. I'm sorry.
How African American families are treated.
How African American families are treated, as well as the caseworkers that work with the family.
Okay, so
Like caseworkers, African American caseworkers, and how they're treated by the court system. How we are, how the child welfare staff is viewed as not being who they are, as real professionals.
okay, all right. So then you're saying that that in courts, both black families are treated, I'm assuming, poorly or unfairly, and the same thing is true for black caseworkers are treated poorly, unfairly. How many of you, by a show of hands, have had the experience of being treated poorly in court because of your ethnicity or your color? You feel you've had that real time, okay? All right. How many of you, by a show of hands, believe that unfair treatment in court happens because of someone's race or ethnicity? Show of hands. So all of y'all believe it, but only 2 or 3 of it's happened. It's interesting. All right, pass the ball. What is racial disparity? Y'all need some catch lessons. Get y'all out on the ball. All right. Yes, ma'am.
I would say that it's access. Hello. I would just say it's the access and quality of resources available in different geographical areas.
Okay, the access and the quality of resources available in various geographic areas. So there's some communities and there's some neighborhoods that have access to both more resources and also better quality resources. Like you can find mental health counselors that are culturally aligned with the families or with the youth that they're working with, or their after-school programs and those sorts of things in some geographies, and in other geographies there's not. Okay, pass the ball to someone else. I was calling for it. Don't throw the mic. All right. You got my time yet, Ms. Tanika?
No, I've been reassigned. So.
Okay. All right, what else?
Come on, you got baseball, come on. You don't need to turn it on. Put your bass in.
Racial disparity is a condition generated by racism, as a result of racism.
Racial disparity is a condition generated by racism. Okay, which suggests there's this thing called racism, there's this thing that's called racism, and then out of that, some of the things that people have been describing, which I would call rhizomes, right? Some of the things that people have been describing, which are like blades of grass, are all examples of this underlying thing called racism. How many of you believe that racism operates in our current society as a primary determinant of people's experiences? Show of hands. Don't be embarrassed if you don't feel that. Okay, all right, thank you. I think someone up there, are you trying to rush me off now?
No. Hold on. Oh, this is on. Before we go on, I do want to acknowledge in the room Mr. Bob Blackwell, who was at the forefront of this work and led this work before his retirement, so going back to 2008. So just want to acknowledge Mr. Bob in the room and thank you for all of your tireless efforts for many years, and we appreciate you being here with us today.
All right, so since I don't know how much time I have, and I'm assuming that it's short, let's take a couple more of those. What do you know about racial disparities? What is it? How do you know it's there? What are its roots? Okay. Someone there.
Well, you get the ball, we'll go to Joanne.
Yes. I wanted to say social status, whether it's black or white, because sometimes Caucasians can discriminate towards Caucasian if they assume they come from the trailer park, so to speak. And I know social status comes up a lot in African Americans as well, but it can be across sector.
Okay.
To different racial backgrounds.
Okay, so let me see if I can catch this. So there's something called social status, and when you said trailer park, that made me think of like class and income, right? Yes. And we often use that example, right? We actually use the term, and we have a thought deeply embedded in us, trailer trash, right? And oftentimes that's an image that we have in poor white people, right? I mean, that's my understanding, okay? So social status can be this income disparity, right? And then it can also be class in the sense of whether or not I'm educated. I'm an educated black man. So if I'm standing next to an uneducated black man, my status might be different in a certain setting. And the way that I'm dressed might indicate my status. So I can be a black man and have privilege. If I'm standing next to a younger brother, right, who's not educated, who can't speak, and we're facing the same judge, and I'm dressed in a particular way, I may have, my social status may be more in line with that judge, right? Like some people used to talk about this post-black experience, right? So there may be all of these elements that could be related to racism, like class, right, culture, but is not quite racism. And I think sometimes people talk about systems of oppression. And I think Lyman touched on that, right? Like I am a heterosexual, cisgendered black man, and I have privilege in lots of areas. As a man, I have privilege. As As a heterosexual man, I had privilege. As a semi-educated man, I had privilege, right? And so there may be places where I have privilege and then places where I don't have privilege, right? Sexual orientation is a privilege. My parent class might be a privilege, right? So when you say social status, there are all of these other things. And there's a term that people have been using the last few years to talk about that, right? Crenshaw's term. Intersectionality, which is, and I think when we were thinking about systems of oppression before Crenshaw's introduced this idea, we would do this thing where we would compare oppressions, right? Well, I'm black and my people were enslaved in America. Well, I was Jewish. We've been slaves longer than y'all been slaves, so get your act together, right? But we would compare these oppressions, right? Like being a black woman is different than being a black man. And what Crenshaw introduced is this idea that the intersection of identity, that the intersection of social statuses is a thing in and of itself, right? And she argued that because there was a case that a company was sued, and the company was sued because they were not hiring black women. And the company's defense was, we hire blacks. We got all these black men that work here. And we hire women. We have all these white women that work here. So your claim of discrimination is not true. And her argument was, no, being a black woman is a particular identity. There's an intersection of identities, and it is that intersection that is discriminating, right? So like a black child with a disability in front of a court system or in front of a caseworker, or a caseworker with a disability, or a black caseworker that dresses like a young person. Right? So, okay, one more. We'll take one more.
I almost forgot what I was going to say.
All right, come on.
What was the question again now? Okay. So my response is where I see, what is it in terms of racial disparities? It's in the law. It's in the law that we live by every day. So there's a number of things that you'll find that continually oppress the system, multiple systems, as the way the law is currently written. So that is one of the major areas in which racial disparities continues to happen. And until we look at how we change some of those laws, we'll find ourselves kind of some of the same thing. We'll be tinkering, as my colleague says.
When I was moving these chairs around, a really close friend of mine a couple of weeks ago said to me, when we don't get to root causes, it's like we are arranging chairs on the Titanic, right? Right? And sometimes that busyness, that frenzy, right, can keep us occupied and busy. But if our focus and ideas around what do we mean when we say racial disparity, if the work cannot be related to what the central issue is, right? And I would suggest that a lot of times we believe that we're focused on racial disparity, and we may be focused on other things. So then the tools that we're using to address racial disparity might be more appropriate to another thing. So like I would suggest to you, I don't know, it might be neck and neck. I would suggest that there's more stupidity in the world than racism. Now some people might say they're the same thing, right? Some people might say they're the same thing. But I would suggest to you that sometimes systems and people make errors that may not necessarily be related to a racial discrimination error. Which is why it's really important that we have a definition of what is racism in child welfare. That's why we're interrogating this thing. When you see a disparity. Many years ago, I read a social scientist who wrote about black children encounter the system when they come into school, right? Otherwise, they're in the community, they're in their neighborhood, right? They're with their family. And then when they come into school, that's when we start counting them, assessing them, and measuring them. And where are we getting lots of child welfare reports? When black children encounter systems, right? So it could be the case that that is systems, ways of responding to children who don't have resources to be cared for in other ways.
But you have to look
Yes,
at
ma'am.
this.
Here, let me get you the mic.
Okay.
I can do this if you want. Like I'm Phil Donahue, just 1 minute.
That's right.
All right, yes. All right.
Okay. You made a good point about the school. So I do know when African American children do go to school, based off the 4th grade boys, reading scores, they start building prisons off of that. So I feel like that's important to keep in mind
Right.
when we're talking about that.
Right.
Also, to me, you have to look at, I don't need your mic. I got big. Also, you have to look at medical. When a kid goes to the doctor. Because black kids are always written off as just a cold, give them some Townhall, when it's something major and it's not addressed.
Exactly.
And then a white kid come in and we don't give them a specialist, and we have to beg for a specialist for kids.
Right.
So that's huge.
So I had no, I don't have time. I had a personal experience with this. I had a lung collapse a few years ago. And athletic, tall, skinny, white guys, their lungs collapse all the time. So people would come to my room and they would look at my chart, and then they would look at me like, why are you here? Before I went to the emergency room and found out that my lung was collapsed, I saw 2 doctors. I saw my regular doctor and I saw a convenient care doctor, and they both did the blood oxygen level, right? And listened to me. And they said, oh, this is just your asthma, you're having an asthma attack. Take some prednisone and some medicine, right? 2 doctors examined me. Here's what I found out. The group of people that were used in order to develop those measures of when your blood oxygen level is high, when it's low, like the test subjects, were white males. Okay? So black males, our test results on that instrument are different. That's a medical fact. You can look it up. Use your phone. You can pull it up right now and say, what do black males look like on oxygen level machines at hospitals? You can pull it up right now, right? My doctors don't know that there's racism built into the instrument that's used for assessment. My doctors have no clue about it. And at least one of the doctors that I saw was a woman of color, all right? She has no clue about it. She looked and saw that my oxygen level was fine. She sent me home. So it's built into the laws, it's built into the structure of the society. All right. How much time do I have? Okay, all right.
For 5 minutes.
All right, so here's what I want you to do, is I want you to get up from your seat, and I want you to come into the circle and have a seat. So this is a metaphor also, what you're doing now in coming into the circle of practitioners, right? Like everybody's here because they care about or want to address or work in the context of racial disparities in child welfare. And there's seats all the way, come on in, come on in, come on in, there's seats all the way back here. And I wish we had more time for this. I think this is one of the elements of systems of oppression is that we don't really build in time to be human beings. So we're moving so fast, we're moving so frenzied, we're so focused on our mission that we actually don't build in time to sort of see and recognize our humanity. So what I want you to do is, yeah. I want to play a game, but I don't have time. I wish we had time. But you know, because we think that if we play, we won't learn as much.
About 10 minutes and then a 5-minute break.
Okay. So we think if we play, we won't learn as much. So, all right. Since now I got twice as much as 5 minutes, we're going to play a game, like a really, really quick game. All right? It is completely silly. These are not spaces. Would you turn that chair around? These are not spaces. So right now, you're sort of, yeah, turn that one around. You're sort of thinking like, what the hell did I come to? And who is this? Yeah, who is this man? And he didn't take his examination. All right. So the only space that there is a space where you're seated, right? So these are not spaces, right? So I'm in the middle. We call this game All My Friends Group, all right? And easy. We're going to do a test round. But before I do a test round, I got to give you these instructions. This is really important, okay? This is safety, okay? No pushing, no tripping, no bumping people out of the way. All right, okay? This is very important. She said, oh, wait, let's just see. All right, so this is how this game works. You stand up, please. Stand up. And move as you're able to move. If you're not able to move that well, all right, then just take care of yourself. This is really, really easy. We're gonna do a test run, okay? So we can move slowly. So the way this game works, there's a seat for you here. The way that this game works is I'm going to say something like all my friends who, and I'm going to fill in blank. And if it applies to you, you have to move from where you are to another space, like musical chairs, right? Okay, right? And you have to move at least like 2 seats, right? Not like this. You have to move, right? That's the idea, right? So, okay, all right. So we'll just do a test run and see. I'm in the middle because there's no seat for me. So if you don't move fast enough, you might end up moving. But I'm going to stay in the middle for a minute. All right. We'll do it like this. All my friends who have worked in child welfare for 20 years or more. Move. You move from where you are. Someone else is moving. You got to find an empty spot. You know where the chairs are. You know what I'm saying? There's one there. There's one there. Right, there's one there, right? See? Simple. Yeah, you can stay standing. All right? See? Easy, right? So, how about this one? All my friends who have a social work degree. Right, see? Right, really? All right, here's one. All my friends who are wearing shoes. All my friends who are wearing shoes. See, easy, right? There should be a chair for you.
Chair's away yet.
No. That's right. Because see, I don't have a chair. But I'm staying in the middle. But I'm going to get out of the middle. Right? So let's just imagine that we wanted to get to know each other a little better. And I'm going to give you a hard one because y'all grown. And also, this is something I've thought about over my 30s. I've lost children as a child welfare worker. Okay? Children murdered, and I've had people murdered because that were on my case. And they're gone to prison. I've lost a bunch of little brothers. So y'all are grown, y'all ain't working. Okay. All my friends who have, all my friends who have read a book or come across a resource in the last year that has profoundly changed the way you think about your work about child welfare. Okay. Fantastic. So now, all right. So those of you that moved, raise your hand. What was it that you read or came across?
racial disproportionality, I would have to look at this long title.
Okay, right. The book with the long title.
But I think it's by Alan Detlef.
Okay, all right, cool.
Thank
And
you.
I know yours was Sean J. Mack.
Sean J.
Was there anything else?
Torn apart.
Okay, all right. And you raise your hand?
The Bible.
Okay, the Bible. Okay. You just came from it. There's a book! What is this? Reading. So you study the Bible, right? So, you know, you talked about systems of well-being and spirituality. Which is very important. Other people, something you came across?
Grandmother's name.
Oh, that's a beautiful, right? That's a beautiful. That's a really, really, you notice we're doing some of that work, right? Someone else? Someone else? This is a resource list, yes?
Something covered.
Okay, double copy. Okay, all right. Anyone else that need? Yes.
Healing of Black trauma.
Healing, who's that by? All right. See, if I had a computer, if I had an assistant, we'll do all of that. So you got you got some knowledge of some resources of things that people have read or studied that has profoundly changed their practice. All right, we're going to do one more, and this time I'm going to get out of the circle, so somebody's going to get stuck in the circle, and then you have to, let's use it this way. Think of something you might like to know about who's in the room and how they are working on racial disparities. Okay, I'll do one, all right? All my friends who are white and have gone to a racial justice or DEIA meeting in the last 6 months. All right. So maybe some way of getting to know, you could either use it as a way of getting to know who's in the space or even sharing something about yourself, either way. And then see who's here. All right. Who are the white people that went to racial justice? Okay. All right. And who are the white people that did not? In the last 6 months. Okay, cool. How about the other non-white people that went to something in the last 6 months? Around DEI, racial justice, right? I find that very interesting. Because oftentimes it is people of color who are reading the books, going to the workshops and doing the study. But in this group, we're about even. So one could say that this group could benefit from doing some racial justice DEI work, because we're kind of under-experienced on some level, right? Right? Okay.
You just took all my time.
Bro, I'm sorry. Give me time, give me time.
Wow. All my friends who believe that they are called into this work. Called into this work.
So I want to point out that we are playing and we are learning about each other and also about ourselves.
So all my friends, retired and otherwise, who have been exposed to issues around race, racial justice, and race practice, who believe that they have integrated any of that thinking into their current practice. This seems
Okay, you see why I said no bumping, no elbows, no tripping? No, I didn't take the shoe. And you know, so if we had more time, what I would say Tell us who you are, what's your name, and what do you do, and then all my friends.
We don't have that. So anyway, so all my friends, who purpose of coming to work because you truly believe that you're going to change this system before you retire. Say that again. All my friends who come to work with the purpose of actually changing a child's life. I'll say like that. Before you retire. You did not say no running though. Did not say no running. That's what you're trying to say.
Why don't you tell us your name? I'm not going to make any comments about that. Right? But I am going to say, if we're stumbling over words like black, African American, white, Caucasian, if we can't say, are you white? Right? If we are in the racial disparities workshop and we're going, if we can't call out race, address race with each other, if we can't do that, why do we expect it's going to happen? Right? Thank you, Ms. White. Please. All my friends.
All my friends.
What do you do?
I'm a DCF caseworker.
Okay, I don't know who can see this case.
Yes.
How do you
So we're good.
What do other people do?
What is that?
What do other people do? What do you love most about being a DCFS case?
It seems that progress finds me and the children when they return home, their faces, see them here, you know.
So that could be in all my friends who most love seeing children return home. Because earlier, someone was talking about seeing themselves as a change agent in the system, right? So you could say that, like, there are people who don't work directly with children and families, but they work in other ways because they're interested in changing the system, right? Then there are other people that work more directly with children and families because that's where their heart is. So there may be people here whose heart is in a different place than yours. You could ask that question and see if their heart is.
All my friends, is your heart in different place? Say that again, all my friends. Is your heart in a different place than mine?
What's your heart?
Returning the children home, seeing their faces, seeing the parents complete their services. My heart is
Okay, so what I want to point out, just in this few minutes that we've had play, that there is opportunity to dig into the things that you're hearing with the people that you're here with. Because, for example, Ms. White says that she likes seeing children, their families, seeing them be reunited. She's a caseworker. She's a direct services person, right? When we were talking about what is racial disparity, just as a, for example, Bobby said that there is this floor of this stuff called racism that all of this stuff comes out of, right? Miss White could do her work for the next 40 years and not necessarily,
We're sorry.
right? But that work, while that work is important and meaningful, right? It doesn't necessarily affect this fundamental area, All right? Can you get 2 more minutes? No. All right, so here's the last 2 minutes. What I want you to do is I want you to look around the room. I want you to find the face of someone who you've not yet met. And I'd like you to go and meet that person and say good morning. Don't be shy. Do not be shy. Don't be shy.
specifically on Springfield issues and generating ideas for the Springfield community or Sangamon County, and then another group that will be in Decatur to also work on the issues and recommendations and that envisioning that we're talking about. It's working now. Thank you. I guess we just needed you to step into the room. I did adjust the keypad. All the way up. Okay. Thank you. So now in this next segment, we do want to spend some time just showing you where we are with the data. Out of transparency, I'll tell you that we're finishing up the most recent data. So this was actually the data that we had from the year before. So when you meet in your groups in Decatur and Springfield, by then, because we're anticipating having those reports, the most recent reports, ready late May, early June. But we do want to talk and show you where we are in terms of the state of child welfare in both Decatur and Springfield, and where we specifically stand in terms of racial disparities, if they are or are not an issue for these two counties, and then from there, have some discussions on what you want to, what you see are the important issues in your community that are driving the numbers, and then how we can envision a new pathway forward. So just a few things I usually like to start with, and just something to keep top in mind. And that is when a child comes into care, and this has been consistent for really decades, there's only about a 50% chance that that child will return home. And that's pretty sobering, because sometimes we think, oh, it's just a small issue, or, you know, there's an immediate safety concern, but we can get the parents the support they need, and the child will return home. It should be a 60 to 90 day or 12 months. But that sobering reality that once a child comes into care, consistently it's about a 50% chance that they'll return home. So the work we do, the work that our partners in the community do, makes a huge difference. Whenever possible, we want to support our families to ensure that children do not have to come into care. Because we know that not only are there traumas associated with children who then are introduced into the child welfare system, but then of course the traumas following entry into care and their engagement. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but who's familiar with ACEs? Okay, great. I know we spend a lot of time, but you know, these are many times issues that really are deep-seated, and which is another reason why we need to make sure that we are partnering with our community members, even our faith communities, our business communities, because these issues are things that if we don't address, these are keeping our children in care. And then issues for themselves. How many of you have seen situations where children you were serving then become young adults, and in spite of our best efforts, we're seeing them have children that come into the system? How many, by a show of hands, have worked with youth who then themselves have had children coming into care? So a pretty significant number. Those traumas repeat themselves. So what can we do to break that cycle? So here's where we are again, and this is actually across Illinois, and then I've got some data with, and this is actually March of 2024. So for Sangamon County, which includes Springfield, a total of 618 children in care, again, as of March. And in Macon County, that includes Decatur, 478. As you can see, the majority of the youth in care are with relatives, or more so for Springfield than for Macon. So as you go into your community groups, when I look at this, one of the questions I would want to ask is, are there things we could be doing to support more relatives having their family members? So again, that's where some of the discussion can occur. We also have the numbers, and you see a pretty, it's an interesting difference in terms of institutional and group home care. Sangamon County with 27, and Macon is showing 0. So I want to know more about that. Is that an accident? Is it a mistake? Who's here from Macon County? We don't have any representatives here. So I want to know, and frankly, even double check, this is the statewide data, but showing no youth in care in institutions or group home, which is a good thing, but I would want to double check that. So when we started this initiative, it wasn't, and I'm sure we all know, there's no one magic thing to do. We cannot wave a magic wand, right, and remove all of the issues that our families are facing. So this was really a strategy that included a number of initiatives. Anyone around when Director Erwin McEwen was here? Okay, so he really did work with us to lead the charge on this. And so he put a number of things in place, including funding. One was the top circle, differential response, and that was, I won't spend a lot of time on that, but that was an initiative where there was an effort to divert some calls that were considered less risky, hotline calls, divert them from the system altogether and have them receive community-based services. We had court improvement projects, and I know there are AOC folks here today. So the administrative offices of the Illinois court started their own initiatives to address racial disparities and the length of time children are staying in care. We had the anti-racism transformation teams, really including both training, but then also looking at what are some of those policies and practices that have some underlying issues around race, bias, etc. The family advocacy centers, they were funded to be those community-based organizations to advocate for families, support them to prevent children from coming into care if there's a distressed family, or maybe not, but the focus is more prevention. I know we were hoping to get a center. I'm looking at LaShonda. Weren't we supposed to get another center in Springfield, Decatur?
We have one in Springfield, Decatur.
Okay.
Wilmington, Peoria, Champaign. That represents the Central Region.
Okay, speak up a little bit. So LaShonda, if you can raise your hand, she leads the Springfield, and it also serves Decatur as well.
Yes.
Okay. So again, these were initiatives that were funded based on the data, based on seeing where we had the most concerns about overrepresentation of children of color. We had father involvement projects. We know that oftentimes fathers get overlooked, and what can we do to shore up our families and our youth so that their fathers also are receiving the support they need. Trauma-informed practice, I think everyone, by the show of hands of you knowing about ACEs, I'm sure most of you are aware, that's been pretty well embedded. And then our community action teams, those local groups that look at the data for your community and then question what's going on here. Where do we really need to put the supports? Where do we need to have changes? As a result of funding cuts and changes in leadership, a number of these things are no longer in existence. So we no longer have differential response, the father involvement projects, and actually the anti-racism transformation teams that Mr. Blackwell started, those have essentially, again, because of staffing, have been really more re-engaged with the community action teams. The court improvement projects, are those going as strong as they were? I know they were pretty active. It seems like some of them are active, but there's definitely been some dwindling down, would you say? And
I've only been here for a couple months.
yeah, each county, I would say they're not as strong and meeting as regularly as they have been, but some still are. So what I want to walk you through, again briefly, because we do want to have some time for discussion, is there are several decision-making points that we look at to be able to determine where the areas of concern are and where we have seen progress. So I'm going to spend some time on that, but as you can see, there are a number of areas where at each of these decision points, a decision is made as to whether a child and their family are introduced into the child welfare system or not, if they are if they are exposed or receiving services, what does that look like? Are there disparities? So I'm going to spend some time showing you some of the outcomes specifically for African American children across each of those decision points. And also for reports of abuse and neglect, we always like to show who are the primary reporters for abuse and neglect, because those are the individuals. Many are, of course, mandated reporters, but that's how children and families get introduced into the child welfare system. So we like to look at that. Are you able to see these numbers okay? Okay, so across several of the reporting groups, you can see that green line is showing the number of reports, and then the blue line is showing out of all those reports what percentage actually was indicated after an investigation for abuse and neglect. So I'm going to turn it over, maybe a couple people can speak out. Does anything stand out to you? What do you see when you see these numbers in terms of who's making the reports and the extent to which those reports result in a finding of abuse and neglect? What stands out? What's that?
Law enforcement.
Law enforcement.
But I think the higher indicated rate is because investigators can then get their law enforcement reports and use that as evidence that there was an incident of abuse or neglect.
Okay, sure. So basically, because law enforcement is making a call, the investigators, from what you're saying, are then using that report as part of their findings, which certainly makes sense. Any other numbers that stand out? The thing that stands out to me and several people is when we look at the school reports, what percentage are we seeing there of those reports actually resulting in a finding? So that is, if you can't see, oh, I've got my umbrella here. School reports, 17% of those reports result in a finding. So that means the other 83% of investigations that families go through because of the report do not result in a finding of abuse and neglect.
It's a little scary that that percentage is close to the non-mandated.
Say that again?
It's a little scary to me that that percentage, 17%, is very close to the 16% for non-mandated.
For the non-mandated, yes, non-mandated reporters also. So, and I will tell you, this data looks different, and this is why we want to do this at the community level. This data looks very different. The reports we showed last week for Bloomington and Peoria, actually there were much fewer law enforcement reports. But the reason why we want to show this is when we're talking about engagement, we need these folks at the table, right? Because these are the groups that, the reporters are the groups that are actually having to make those calls that may or may not result in a finding of abuse and neglect. So we need to hear from them, what's going on in the community, and certainly with the schools, with only 17% of those reports resulting in a finding of abuse and neglect. What's going on? How can we partner? Yes.
I worked at the hotline for 12 years, and some hotline workers in here. The schools will call you any and everything. The schools will grow a conscience and wait at the end of the year and want to. If a child was beat and had a bruise 6 months ago, you should have called it in 6 months ago. If the parent left the child home alone 3 months ago, you got to call it in 3 months ago when it's going on fresh. Because what parent is going to say, yeah, I left it? You have to call when it's happening. And then when you say to a school, no, that does not reach the criteria of taking a report, well, I need to talk to a supervisor. So when they do mandated reporting training, then they want to call in every single thing. But we have to abide by the law, and we can only take so much. Every report is investigated. I train investigators for a living. So every investigator must go out, and you can't look at the police report. You can't look at the medical report that the abuse happened. There's a criteria of everybody you have to talk to.
That's
and
right.
then an informed decision must be made.
So you're saying if we're over-relying on reports from the professionals, we certainly want to take those into account,
Yes.
but are the investigators doing their own assessment
Yes, they have to,
independent?
because the investigator and their supervisor makes the last informed decision. But you're going to talk to the schools, you're going to talk to the references the parents give, you're going to talk
That's
to
right.
the doctors, you're going to talk to the pediatrician. It is more than just the police call and yeah, the investigator got the report and we make that decision. No, ma'am.
So this is where, thank you, so this is where those conversations need to be had. Having those conversations with school officials. And, you know, I know it gets tricky for them because they're trained, call it in. If there's no doubt, call it in, call it in. But are there some things that the school, some supports? If a child comes with no socks in the winter, is that a call in, or is that, hey, come to the office, sweetie, we've got some extra socks for you to wear. Send some socks home with mom or dad. So these are the conversations we need to have. Now here for Macon, you see even a higher percentage of the law enforcement, over 50% of those reports are indicated for abuse and neglect. And I'm just showing you this so that when you come back together, hopefully you'll join either the Springfield or Decatur team that will be ongoing, having these discussions, looking at the data, coming up with solutions, thinking outside of the box. What can we do that's innovative? So now I'm going to go to, we know we've been through the reports that were called in and what proportion of those result in a finding of abuse and neglect. So I'm going to go through a few more of the decision points. So we know that every call that comes in the hotline is not accepted, right? So here we have a formula. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on math, but I did just want to show you. What we do is look at the proportion of accepted reports that relates to the child's population in that community to be able to tell the extent to which there are disparities. So I'm going to show you the data for that for African American and Hispanic children, so, and how they compare with white children in the same community. So for calls that are accepted into the hotline, based on that disparity formula, Black children are 3.46 more likely to, a report that's called in is more likely to be accepted for investigation compared to white children. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, for Hispanic children, it's actually lower. So anything less than 1% means it's a lower proportion than when we would compare to white children, and white children being the majority of the population. So we see that Black children, almost 3.5 times more likely when a call is made that call would move on to be further evaluated for abuse abuse and neglect. Macon, it's a little different. The disparities are a little bit lower, but still almost 3%, 3 times more likely that a black child, a report where a child who is black is the subject of that report would move on for further investigation. Hispanic children is a little bit higher here, but still in the 1 range, so almost on par with children from the majority population. Any questions about that accepted report decision line? Okay, now we're going into, it's passed on to investigation and the extent to which those reports result in a finding of abuse and neglect. Okay, so in terms of those decisions, yes, we went out, we investigated. Are there disparities here for black children and Hispanic children compared to white children? We're in the 1 range, which means once there's an investigation, they're not, black children and Hispanic children are not really more likely for that report to result in a finding of abuse and neglect. So we have more calls, but when it comes to the investigation process, it's about on par. I will tell you that when we started this initiative years ago, the numbers were not looking like this. And that tells me and many of us that the work, the advocacy, the reviewing policies does matter. So I'm really hoping if we can, since we have several years worth of data, that for this next round we can also include some comparisons over the years. So what's the next stage? After that finding of abuse and neglect, what's the next stage? Who can tell me? What decisions have to be made if there's a finding of abuse and neglect? Yes, Joanne, thank you. So whether we remove the child from the home or serve the family with an indicated report, but serve them with the child in the home. So let's look at the disparities for that decision point. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't do Macon. But Macon, again, is similar, but look now, we're seeing that there's more likely to be a finding for Hispanic children. Still though, generally we say if it's lower than 1.5, I mean, it's something to be somewhat concerned, but still kind of on par with the majority population. So Macon is different, which is why we need to look at each community differently. But in terms of foster care entries, out of those decisions that are made, there's a finding of abuse and neglect. What proportion of those children then come into care? For Sangamon County, again, compared to white children, if we were at a 1-to-1 ratio, that would be about on par. We're at 99.99. So, and then Hispanics really being underrepresented the rate. So the Hispanics for foster care entry are less likely compared to whites to enter care. Any thoughts on this? So we're not seeing the disparities for foster care entries. Again, much different than what we have seen previously. I see that Dejanay, did Dejanay leave out? Okay, there's a new initiative that's called anti-bias removal, so that names and other identifiers are being removed from a case, and so that's just being started here in Illinois, so really looking forward to seeing what that, what that initiative produces. So that's for Sangamon. Let's look at Macon. So for black children, about a 1-on-1 ratio, and Hispanic children, Again, this is based on the population. Yes, LaShonda?
So based on this data, you basically saying that there's no disproportionality in these two counties anymore.
For this, yes, for these decision points. Thoughts on that? I know you have been in the thick of this for many years.
Well, I think it's relative, and it makes a difference when you're determining how people approach cases. If they no longer think that there's disproportionality, then we no longer consider race in decisions as a whole. Or, what is relative to unique circumstances based on culture or race. And so it makes sense to me, seeing these numbers now, why the approach in some circles is that there is no issue of disproportionality anymore today.
Okay. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? If seeing these numbers then tell people, decision makers, providers, that there's really no disparity at the level of foster care entries, is that a good thing or a bad thing, or cautious? What would be your interpretation?
Me personally, I would be cautious because I think data is only as good as the person entering the information or what is being received. I don't know that that's a true reflection of practice on the ground.
Okay, so definitely some further discussions must be had. Lyman?
Yeah, I would encourage you, Dr. Doris, to be clear about the distinction between disproportionality and disparity. We're using those terms interchangeably and they're not the same thing.
Okay.
Disproportionality starts at the front end where you see the numbers much higher. This shows the decision points, which indicates the disparities, right? So you could say that there's not disparity at the foster care entry rate in Macon County. That does not mean there's not still disproportionality in the system. There's higher rates of African American and Hispanic children in the system. So it's just getting clear about those terms.
And thank you, and certainly there's a lot of ways to review the data. For each of these decision points, I do have the formula here. So for foster care entries, how those numbers come about is we compare the foster care entries with the proportion of indicated reports. So what proportion of indicated reports result in a child coming into care, and then we compare that for both African Americans and whites, and then the same for Hispanics. So that is a accepted formula that is used for foster care entries. And thanks for bringing that up, because for each of these areas, we do note how those numbers come about. Doesn't mean that that's the be-all and end-all, but it's certainly worth that further discussion, would you say?
And I don't know if I missed it, one of your slides, does it also indicate how long they stay in here once they leave?
No. And it's always a tricky thing, because when we have these discussions, we do want to have some engagement, so didn't provide that length of care. But again, come to the local community action team meeting, and we'll be asking you what additional kinds of data, what additional kinds of information is needed to be able to delve in deeper. So now we're moving, and this is the last one I'm going to show today. This is the total youth in care by race and ethnicity. So whether a child came into care at the time this data was collected, whether they've been in care a day, whether they've been in care a year, whether they've been in care 18 years. The total youth in care. And here is the disparity ratio. So for Sangamon, Black children are 4 times more likely to be in care at the time this data was collected. And then you see Hispanic children, not even at 1%, 0.4%, more compared to white children. So from this, we're able to hone in on where the disparities are taking place, again, as Lyman said, disproportionality is when we're looking strictly at the population numbers, but the disparity ratios are also factoring in those other data points in whether a case, the proportion of children that are subject to an indicator report, et cetera, et cetera. So when you come to future meetings for your action teams, and hopefully you will, the thing that I appreciate about looking at the data in this format as well as others, it shows us really, really, really where the, these touch points are. So we have children, even though the proportion of children coming into care appears to have evened out, but Black children who are already in care, they are staying in care. So what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of the service providers? How do we address these issues? And here's for Macon. Again, 3 times more likely than white children to be in care. Regardless of when they came into care, they're not leaving out. 0.3 for Hispanic children. So again, there is, we're less likely to, they're not even at the level compared to white children. Any other observations about this decision point?
So the numbers have improved, but the work still has to be done.
Absolutely. When looking at the disparities. So, you know, and for those of you who, I saw a number of people who've been doing this work for decades, it's important to know that, yeah, there are potentially some changes in policies and trainings that we hope are having an impact after 10, 15 years, right? Doesn't mean we're out of the woods. It doesn't mean that they're not concerns. But I spoke to some folks that are here working with children that are dually involved with child welfare and juvenile justice system. So one of the things I would want to ask is those children who are staying in care, let's look at them. What are they more likely to be dually involved? What's going on with their families? How many times have they moved from one home to another? This is where we really need the input from private agencies. Private agencies are primarily serving families that come into care and have that return home goal. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Sam, because this is where we want to talk about what our communities can do. Sam, you have a look on your face. But let's get into some dialogue about where we go from here. What can our communities do? What can the people in this room do? And who else needs to be at the table moving forward? Oh, I'm sorry. Lunch? Okay.
Sam's going to come after lunch, but I'm sure you want to eat, right? I'm seeing some heads. So we have potbellies. We have an assortment. We have some ham, we have turkey, we have chicken salad. There's about 5 veggie meals, and then we have some wrecks. So it's the basic box lunch with the sandwich, chip, and cookie. You are welcome to switch the chips and cookies if you don't like what you get in your box. So we are going to take just a few minutes to grab lunch. Sam is going to give you a moment to actually eat it, and then he's going to bring us back together. All right, thank you.
And we neglected to introduce my good friend and colleague, Dr. Danica Avant. She's also a faculty member at Illinois State University. So let's give her a hand for supporting. Thank you.
How many of you are from Springfield? Okay. And where are the rest of you people from? How many in Chicago? All right, where else? Bloomington, Peoria, Bloomington, Peoria, Chicago, Springfield. That's it? Okay? So, I know that the focus for this portion of your time with each other and together is ideally focusing on your area and work to take place in your area around addressing racial disparities. And Doris has described this work that has been going on for a long time, and that there has been progress in this work, and that there's still lots of work to do. So, in my mind, what I think I know, one of the things that I think that I know is that sometimes we want to jump to what needs to be done, and we may not actually be ready to do what needs to be done. And I have this idea, well, it's not my idea, but Lyman mentioned this piece of writing. It's called Four Pivots by Sean Ginwright. And Sean says that rather than thinking about what it is that we need to do or want to do, that a good place for us to put our attention is who do we need to become or be, right? So I know I've entered into many circumstances, situations, projects, and I mean, I do all right, but I also know that I am often looking for more from myself and more from the circumstances and the situations and the projects that I'm in. Is there anybody else in here who could say amen to that? Amen. Like, I do all right. I mean, I do all right. And you know what? I can even look real good. You know, but I also know that there's something that is, I want more. And I feel like I can do more, and I feel like we can do more. So I'm going to ask you to do one thing, piece of paper and a pen, and this is just for you. This is just for you, okay? We didn't get a chance to do some other stuff that I wanted to do with you. All right, so this first part is not for you. The next part will be for you. Here's the first part. This is not for you. This is for us. What is your greatest strength, your greatest asset? What is your superpower, specifically in terms of addressing racial disparities in child welfare as you understand it? What is your greatest strength, your greatest asset in terms of addressing racial disparities? What's your superpower? What do you bring into the mix? What are you most proud of? What makes you shine? In the Four Pivots, Ginwright talks about hustle and flow. You know, sometimes you're working on something, feels like it's going nowhere, and then sometimes you get into a flow, and it feels good, it feels almost effortless. And we're often taught that real work is when it feels like you're working, versus when you do things almost naturally out of who you are and what you care about. So what is your superpower? That's for all of us. This next one is just for you, this question. What is weighing on you now? What are you wrestling with? What are you struggling with? What's taking your energy your attention, your time. Could be very personal things. I'm not going to ask you to disclose any of that. Could be very personal things. Could be things you've been, if you're like me, I'm a slow learner. I've been working on the same things all my life. But what are the things that are weighing on you right now? What are the obstacles, the stumbling blocks, the mountains, the hurdles that you personally and professionally are struggling with? If this was not in my way, then, all right? So superpower, what are the hurdles and things? I just want you to put those hurdles down. Sometimes when you write them down and you look at them, it makes it concrete that there are always challenges. There are always challenges. A question that I've started to, in my primary line of work, the question that we've started to ask is not only where are we, but why are we still here? What is sustaining us in this particular predicament that we are in? Why are we still here? And I think so much of that is about where we are personally, professionally. There's a quote that says, don't ask what the world needs. I thought you were finishing the quote. I was like, yeah, that's right. Don't ask what the world needs, right? Don't ask what the world needs. Don't ask what your agency needs. Don't ask what your family needs. Don't ask what your spouse needs. Become an evolved person. Become the best version of you. Become the best thing you can offer the world. That's what the world needs. You feel me? That's what the world needs. So, anyway, we are gonna do some sort of thinking together about where we go now. But I would be interested to hear. Let me get a stress ball. Anybody got a stress ball? Here's a stress ball. We'll start with you. What's your name? Rachel. I'd be interested to hear what's your superpower. And you gotta move quick. Actually, let's not do the straight ball. Let's do it this way. You'll stand up and say, I'm Rachel. My superpower is connecting people. And then you point to somebody and then that person. Just shy people love this part of it. Love it. All right.
I'm Rachel, and my superpower is to relate to my clients and community needs.
All right. Point to somebody. You don't have to throw the ball. Because these people can't catch it. So I don't know if you were here earlier or not. All right. Up, nice and loud. What's your superpower?
My name is Adriana Stevenson. I believe my superpower is bringing good energy to the workplace, high energy.
Good energy to the workplace.
Oh, it seems to be working now.
Point to somebody here. It looks like you're going to point to her.
She did like that.
That's good. The shy people love this.
I would say my superpower is I'm a good caretaker for others.
Point to somebody. Let them know.
Oh, point to somebody?
You point to somebody who goes to us.
Ready? I play softball.
Yes, let's go. So stand up and then point to someone. You're following direction, right? That could be your superpower.
My superpower is advocating.
Advocating, okay. So if I were in a group of people, I was going to be working with them on racial disparities, I might want to know what their talents are, what their interests are. And again, talking about first steps, I don't know if you all made an agreement to work together. You have not? No. I'm sorry? Have you all as a group that's concerned about racial disparities in child welfare, talking about the people here in the room right now, have y'all made an agreement to work together on that issue?
We all showed up. It's like an unspoken agreement. We all here.
I said that's fine.
All right, that's 3 of you. So you all have made an agreement to work together on racial disparities. I know 3 of you said yes.
I showed up.
Okay, so what some people are saying is, I showed up today, I didn't make that agreement with you all.
Are you willing to help us?
So that's one idea, by working together. What does that mean? So how is it you all have made an agreement to work together and you don't really know what that means? Like, okay, give me $50, this is working together. Let's take out your checkbook and give me $50, then we on racial disparities. What does working together for you all mean? Somebody should write that down. Someone should write that down. So you all are willing to work together? Raise your hand if you are willing to work with the other people in this room around the issue of, what did Lyman say, not addressing racial disparity, but sort of, I don't know, responding, correcting, mitigating racial disparities, right? And so that means, so everybody said yes. Everybody said yes. And do you all know how to get a hold of each other? Not yet, okay. Are you willing to be available to get for each other? Yes, okay, so why don't someone start an email list, your name very clearly written, and start sending that around, and then we'll make sure those of you that are on that list that are willing to be in touch with everyone else here. Did you have that? Doris is going to say something.
Has anyone not signed the sign-in sheet? I'll bring that around. If you're not on there, then that's how we'll get your name. I'll get the sign-in.
Right, and then part of that means that, tell me your name. The woman behind you. Amy. So part of that means that I might text Amy and call Amy and say, Amy, I'm working on something, and you said you'd be interested. Can I talk to you about it? Right? That's what you're saying you're willing to do. Folks in this room. Okay. So someone said partnership is one way. What else? I would say connection. Again? Collaboration. Okay. Willing to collaborate. You know, oftentimes what happens in our systems is that we have our office or our agency or our job has a mission. And sometimes that mission means that we don't collaborate because the project might appear to be outside of our mission. And so we sort of stay in these sort of siloed ways of approaching the same problem. So the idea around collaboration is that we are willing to expand our mission, to broaden our mission, to reach across our particular jobs and agencies, maybe just to reach to another person, right? And to Taylor, right? And say, hey Taylor, can we talk about something I'm interested, or while we were together you said this was something you might be interested in. She may be in a completely different area than I am, but collaboration sort of requires that, right? How else would you like to work with each other around racial disparities in child welfare?
Culturally informed. Being culturally informed.
Being culturally informed. What does that mean?
Like be aware of the families you're serving, what's their values, their beliefs.
Okay. So this sort of, so the next time that we're all together and I say, have you been to a workshop in the last 6 months where you've read something about DEI or cultural information, right? And people here shared, oh, I read this book, it really changed my life, this was really important. Probably someone sitting next to you has had an experience or has come across a resource or learned about a program that can move us all closer to being more culturally informed. And then also in the area of anti-racism work or anti-oppression work, sometimes we find what we call the load of that work, the responsibility of that work, falls disproportionately on the people that are more negatively affected by that work. So for example, women do much more work around preserving relationships and families than men do, right? People of color often do much more work within their organizations around anti-racism and anti-prejudice work, right? Young people often do much more work around anti-ageism, trying to get put them at the table. Does that make sense? Right? So part of sort of being culturally informed is being aware of what your position may be relative to the issue that you're working on. Employed people have a whole lot to say about people who are unemployed. Right? Right? And, okay, how else do you want to work together? How else would you like to work together? What other commitment are you willing to make to each other?
Continuing the conversation.
Say that again?
Continuing the conversation.
Continuing the conversation, okay. And what are some ways that you can continue the conversation?
Well, they can attend the next town hall meeting.
Okay, so attend, there's going to be one in Champaign, attend the next town hall.
And also join one of the action teams in their area.
Okay, and who's heading the action team in Springfield? Who's here connected to the action team in Springfield? Okay, Rachel is. All right. So we're going to put Rachel's email, cell phone, and bank pen account down here so everybody can take that down. And social security number. All right, Rachel, what's your last name? Rachel Wilson. Okay. And you have what is the way that someone can get help with you?
rwilson@primeforlife.org. The 4 is a number.
At Prime, it's a number?
Prime with the D at the end.
Prime,
Yep, life.
LIFE.org, okay? And this is the Springfield Action Group, right? And do you all have a designated time that you meet?
We meet second Tuesday of every month at 12:15.
Second Tuesday every month. When's your next meeting?
Next Tuesday, I
At 12:15. Next meeting is, thank you, 5/14/24. Do you meet virtually or always in person?
think. We have the option for both.
And where do you meet in person?
Second in County, on 9th Street, 200 North 9th Street. County building.
Sangamon County Building, 200 North, North Sangamon, 200 North 9th. Someone look that up?
It's the courthouse.
Oh,
Everybody knows courthouse.
all my friends on probation.
And Geneva Bird is a co-leader.
Who is? GENEVA,
BYRD.
BYRD, and what is your,
Illinois.gov.
what is it?
Illinois.gov.
And we'll send out the contact
Geneva.bird
list. Yeah.
at Illinois.gov.
Yes.
So those of you that are willing to stay in communication and willing to do some work with the Springfield group, these are your, is there anybody else who would like to be a contact in Springfield? Someone would like to get more deeply involved with the work? Anyone else? All right, so those are your 2 contact people here. Okay, so we've got about 25 minutes or so, and I think one of the things that we were circling around is, what do you do now? What do you do now? So you said we're willing to work together. Here's some of the ways that we would like to approach the work with each other. Here are some contact people. Here's the time and date for the next meeting in Springfield. It happens virtually and it happens in person. How would you like to use the rest of the time? Yes, ma'am.
Also sharing your demographics, because I
said demographics, because certain counties I don't know anything about. So if we're sharing information, I could look on there, maybe get a contact person, learn a little bit more about the county that I'm going to. Because I've gone into some counties and I'm like, am I really supposed to be here? So to speak, you know. So knowing that, or even having a contact person. And then too, if I'm going into the rural areas, which I have, you know, I might be transporting a white female to go see her children in a smaller county. And, you know, I think that really helps too, just to know where you're going, and if there's a contact person there that you can,
Okay, yeah, so Doris and I were actually talking about this morning, because I live in Champaign. I don't know Springfield very well. And I drove over last night, and I turned into the State Fair space, right? Where we are, right? So I turned into the State Fair space, okay? So I'm from Brooklyn. Right? There's a lot of buildings and they're real tall, and there's like 1 million people. I'm cool. But when I turned down that gravel road, right, the hair on the back of my neck, my Brooklyn spidey senses said, boy, where you at? Right? I mean, really, right? Really. And so that happens. This is why it is so important that we have allies and that we agree to be each other's allies. That's why I said, this is white, right? Because we won't talk about race and we won't cross that divide and ask each other, right? And so I know what part of what Doris and I were talking about is we assume that if someone is in like Chicago or New York and they're going into a neighborhood that is mostly black and there's a lot of violence in that neighborhood, we understand that to be a barrier. But I've done that too. I've gone on calls at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning to little small white towns in the middle of, you know, nowhere, coming to take custody of a child, right? So, yeah, so just being, and just generally being willing to share. I had a quote that I wanted to share with you by this guy. It's not Gregory Porter. Who's the other Porter? Gay black man. Billy Porter. Billy Porter, right? Yeah. So, you know, Billy, he's blowing up. And one of the things that he said is that people used to, he said his being queer was a liability, right? And so he hid. But now he's come out, right? Like way out, right?
Oh, he's going.
Right? He's like way out. And he's brought all his talent. He's let all of his talent out. He's an amazing singer, dancer, designer, just huge, right?
He was a songwriter, nobody knew.
He was a songwriter, no one knew who he was. But because he let that out, right? And the point of us looking at each other is that if we don't do that with each other, then, you know, why are we still here, right? And so being able to, with each other, to be able to like reach across. All right, what would you like to do with the remaining 20 minutes? You'll re-sing? You'll only ask that once. What would you like to do? Okay, let's frame the question this way. So you've been here for a few hours. You've heard several people speak. You've gotten a chance to meet each other. What stands out for you? What surprised you? Let's go with that. What surprised you about today? What surprised you about today?
I knew you were going to do that. I was surprised that I didn't mind the group activity.
You were surprised by that, okay.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, okay. What did you learn? Yes, ma'am. Tell me your name again.
That more,
Lori, okay.
that once a child is in care, they are 50-50 chance.
Isn't that devastating? How important it is to know that next time you're standing and you're involved with a kid.
That when a child is in care, they only have a 50% chance of returning home.
Thank you. You can repeat
Well, she was right there.
What else did you learn today?
I don't know if this is necessarily something I learned because I kind of already knew that there was a racial disparity in the child welfare system. I kind of knew that it was more Black children and Hispanic children in care than their counterparts. But what I would like to see is a review of why that is and more discussion of why that's taking place and what can be implemented to mitigate that. So like talk about the real issues. Like the lack of resources in the Black community.
Okay. All right. So maybe following your lead, what questions come up for you now? Yes, ma'am.
I want to say when questions come up, I just wanted to give you an example. I'm from the Springfield Urban League, we contract with DHS, which we have them come down, and we're supposed to help them get into the workforce. But sometimes when you're speaking to your participants, you find that they may have children in BCFS, and I've worked in that arena as well. And I have a young lady whose child is in a different county, but she says she has to be responsible for getting to that county. And, you know, unless it's changed, that's not true. We're supposed to help either transport the child or transport her. And she is a woman of color. I also have found with working with other women in DCFS, they don't know all the services that DCFS provide. I said, well, do you know she needs housing? I said, well, DCFS is supposed to be helping you with housing. She's not aware of that. You know, so I think that's some of the racial barriers is that if they're not learning in something, sometimes, you know, I don't want to be harmful to caseworkers, sometimes if that caseworker is Caucasian, is she working harder for that Black female opposed to someone of her own race?
So we talked about that earlier, right? Like social status and how race may operate in our activity or in what we do and how we do it, our access to information, what we know and what we don't know, or what we think other people know and what other people may not know, right? And so it's so important that we talk about that and that we be able, this is the hardest thing. We have a really difficult time asking each other to be accountable and present. We have a really hard time with that. And then it's even harder if, you know, if we're across difference, right? Like you don't work in my office, or, you know, just being able to sit down and get a deep understanding of what is happening and what is making that happen, what factors lead to racial disparities. And we've seen that counties are different. So there may be these important and subtle differences in counties. What else surprised you? What questions do you have? What would you love to do now going forward?
Have an observation. Don't want to tell me that. So we're looking at the hotline calls versus indicated reports. And like how many were indicated versus how many came in. I want you to think back in the past because I've been around here too long. We used to do
report or training in person. So you think about our teachers. My husband works for a school. He does an online training now where he just goes and pushes buttons. How much of that training do you think they're truly reading? Because technology is great to an extent, but how much are they losing by us not doing in-person trainings with them where the teachers can actually ask questions and we can sit back and explain, this is the difference between a bad parenting choice versus abuse or neglect. Why do you think there's more reports that are being made on children of color or different ethnicities versus white children? And bringing that to the forefront of law enforcement or teachers or the other agencies that are calling in the reports, the people, the agencies that we get to touch. You said a lot of times Black children's first report comes in when kids enter school and are hitting those systems. So those are the systems that we need to work on educating, because there is a difference between stupidity and ignorance. Ignorance are people that just don't know any better.
Any comments, responses?
I have one comment, and I think also included with that is people. I'm good. You can hear me. I think some of that is about the real thing now that everybody wants to cover themselves. You know, everybody wants to be somebody else's partner. I don't want to see it and not do something. And then when my boss sees it, or my neighbor sees it, or the next person, neighbor at work, my coworker, I guess, sees it, then they do something, and it really turns out to be something, and then it gets to be, Judy saw it first, and she didn't do anything. And that's a big deal. I found that's even a big deal just with working, with people working, with a caseworker working and reporting something to their supervisor. You know, and you know, with technology, unfortunately, it's great. I love a Zoom meeting. You know, it's real nice that I can sit in my own coffee pot. You know, not in my own kitchen, in my own coffee pot. It's nice that you have that, but I also find that when you have an in-person meeting, you may have just as many people on there electronic. So I don't know that it really makes a difference.
So what I heard from your comment is that in-person training with folks in schools, and just some person-to-person in schools, is important. I also think I heard you asking a question about what does it mean. I think I missed the first part, but there seemed to be like a question around if you have a racial disparity, what does that mean?
Okay, I made multiple points, and I apologize.
No, that's...
I do feel like when you are just doing a training at your computer, you are not allowed to ask questions. How many times do you do a training for the state or whatever, and you do have further follow-up questions, but they never get answered because you are not in person where you can have a discussion or you can ask a question. So you miss that aspect when you can't do an in-person training. I'm not saying it has to be every year, but if it's every second or third year you send an in-person person to the school to do that training, you can do that. But when you're in person, you can be having those conversations about racial disparities while doing the conversation about child abuse and neglect trainings and when to report and when not to report.
Well, and also having someone from that community to do the training, because in the field I've been in DCFS for 18 years, I used to do those trainings at Urban League and the schools and other areas where they were asked, and then we got taken away from us. And so even if they do something online, that person may not be from that community and know what that community's needs are.
That sounds like an interest of people in Springfield, in-person trainings around what you pointed out earlier, around cultural information. Right, like if a person is making a decision, what's the basis of their decision? They're indicating a report or they're making a report. What's the basis of them doing that? And I agree with you. I think in-person stuff is really important. I I think one of the ways that it's very important is that it builds relationships between human beings. And we can see each other and we can get to know each other. We have all these defenses that keep us from that anyway. And so then when you put a computer, I mean, it's funny to be in the helping profession with people and to be doing that on your computer. I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing. Last couple of comments and then we'll let you go home. Anything else? Oh, back in order. Anything else anyone wants to make sure we know before you leave? So I'm willing to bet that anyone here could make an important and meaningful list of ways that we could address ongoing racial disparities in child welfare. We could list the people, the agencies, the organizations to work with. But if we're not willing to work with each other around those things, it can be the most beautiful list. So I think that's probably the most important thing. So I know Danica probably has something else for you to do. But I'm going to give you one last assignment. If there's someone here that you've not met throughout the day, I'd like you to get up and go meet one more person before you leave. Exchange cards, shake hands, say hello, borrow $10. And again, why don't you stand up? This is your last task. One more person to go meet and act with. One more person.
Nice to meet you. I'm Mary. I'm Summer. Hi, Summer. Nice to meet you. Hi, Summer. Hello. I'm Lori. Nice to meet you guys. Nice to meet you.
Okay, so there's some snacks and fruit, water. Please, the boxes of snacks, please feel free to take those.
Okay, everyone, as we close out today's town hall meeting, we really shared a wealth of information, and I really appreciate everyone's feedback. I think we got some strategies going, some thinking going in terms of next steps. I would like to strongly encourage all of you that reside in the Springfield area to touch base and reach out to the action team members that are here. You will receive information from us thanking you with some more follow-up comments. But once again, I just want to thank every one of you for coming out, taking time out of your busy schedules to receive information that's really much needed that we can take back to our children and families and the overall community. So be safe, and we will be in touch.